Welcome to Womanhood the Podcast. Our aim is to start conversation by providing an insight into the lives of transgender women through their own unique perspectives and personal experiences. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hello, I'm Charlotte Stamborough, and today I am joined with a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Vicky Laylor. I'm a trans woman.
So, how did you decide on the name Vicky?
Well, it's quite interesting how I came about the name Vicky. Before I came out, I was actually married. So I hatched the plan of being able to explore myself while I'm married by looking into being a drag artist, believe it or not. I know it sounds a bit wacky, because it's like, what? You think that's going to be better, saying to your wife that you want to do drag? But I've got a background in sort of a little bit of performing arts, but not too much, sort of being creative, So I saw an advert for a drag artist in Marmaris in Turkey, but it weren't the right time to do that, like having young kids and things like that, even though it was in the summer period, in the school holidays. So I actually hatched a plan to get a bit of a drag scene in Sheffield. So my eldest sister and my wife was trying to decide my name, and one came up with Minx and the other one come up with Vixen because they said, it needs to be double-barreled. So Vixen Minx was born, and then Vixen for short is Vix, and Vix is also short for Vicky. So hence Vicky was born.
I love that. What a great story. So obviously you say you are transgender. Do you remember the first time that you felt that your spirit was different to the one that you were assigned to at birth?
Well, that's a long road. I first discovered this side or knew that I was different back when I was 11 years old. So that would have been about 1988. But back then in the 80s, it wasn't as known about as what it is now. And, people are only just learning about this now. So, all I knew is that I knew there was something different, but I didn't quite know what it were. And it just unveiled itself over nearly 3 decades.
So you said you were 11 at the time that you started feeling a bit different. At that time in your life, did you have any access to any information about being transgender at all?
No, there was no information back then because, like I say, it was the late 80s, so the internet didn't exist. I also grew up in a very religious, evangelical Christian household. So back then, there wasn't no info on anything like this. There wasn't no books. The only thing that come close, or the only people that come close to representing who I am, is the likes of a certain couple of drag artists, Lily Savage, RuPaul, because, RuPaul's been around a long time. Other than that, that's all I knew. And the only other thing you saw back then as representation of transgender or transsexuals, as it was probably more termed then, was when we was portrayed in a bad light on TV programmes as dirty and pervy and all the other just negative connotations. So there was no information. So I just thought I was a bit weird and just kept trying to push it away.
So obviously you've said that you tried to push it away. What was it like emotionally trying to come to terms with your identity?
Again, because it was over such a long period of time, I've gone through various different emotions. As I'm talking to you now, I'm a post-op trans woman, which is something that happened last June. So some people may know me from the Making of Me documentary, what aired on Channel 4 last year, about a year ago. I've had my surgery since then, so obviously that's the best feeling ever for me. But over nearly 3 decades, I've gone from feeling shame, embarrassment, to the point where I've hid it, to the point where it almost didn't exist. But then I had my triggers, if that makes sense. So I could be walking down the street, see a nice lady dressed in her office wear, or walk past a nice shoe shop, a nice ladies' clothing shop, and it would just bring it back. It's like the file would go from the back of my head to the front of my head, and then I'd feel shame and embarrassment and try and put a lid back on it, and it was just that situation for at least a good 2 decades, going on to 3 decades.
So obviously you've touched on women's clothing. At what age did you make that shift and start dressing how you wanted to dress?
I think the first time I actually experimented was around age 20. I bought my first pair of high heel shoes from a local sex shop. I've always been quite entrepreneurial, and I used to buy the Exchanger Mart, which had businesses for sale and things like that in the back of it. So I used to buy these for like ideas, and at the back pages there was like adverts for like the local sex shops in Attercliffe, and one of them advertised that they did like sold shoes in the bigger sizes and did like makeovers, transgender makeovers, and that just brought it all back. After plucking up the courage, if you like, to go down that road and go to the shop, like I went and bought my first pair of high heels. I wore them for about 2 weeks and then I threw them in the bin, and then a couple of weeks later, I did the same thing, bought another pair of more expensive shoes, wore them for a couple of weeks, and then I threw them in the bin, and then I suppressed it for over a decade.
So did the discovery of your true self coincide with any body dysmorphia?
In the early days, like, I didn't expect to be able to come this far. I feel like what I went through leading up to me coming out, or the frustration, that was my body dysmorphia. I just didn't feel comfortable in my old male skin. I just didn't feel comfortable, and it just caused me a lot of pain and frustration, to the point where even some of my old work colleagues who I used to work with at Meadowhall, when I used to work for Meadowhall Security, they've actually said they knew that there was something about me, but they just couldn't figure out what it was, because they said that I didn't seem like I was at peace with myself. And I wasn't at peace with myself. But at the time, it's because I've suppressed it so much. It's like you don't realise that that's what it is, that it's, being trapped in the wrong body. It's only through over time, and now that I've transitioned, or once I started transitioning medically, through hormones, that I realised that, because I finally felt a lot more at peace with myself, that's what it was. That's why I didn't feel at one with myself, if that makes sense.
So what has the recovery process been like so far post-surgery?
The post-surgery recovery, wow. It was very painful, the first 6 weeks. Basically, you've just got to take it easy for like 12 weeks. It's a 12-week recovery. You've got to eat well to ensure you're getting the nutrients so that you heal, and just basically take it easy. I was going to say it's as simple as that, but the other thing you have to do is dilation. So we have to dilate. Well, I had to anyway, because depending on the different surgeons use different techniques, so it may be different for different people, but I had to dilate 3 times a day, about every 4 hours, for 20 minutes each time. And you did that for 3 times a day for 8 weeks, and then it dropped down to twice a day for another 8 weeks, and then once a day for 8 weeks. So that's 6 months of dilation. But the actual healing process actually takes 3 months. But you have to dilate on a quite regular basis for 6 months, for the first 6 months after surgery. And then after that, my surgeon told me it's just once or twice a week for the rest of your life, to make sure it doesn't heal up, because your body can sometimes treat it like a wound and want to heal it, with it being a neo-vagina rather than a natal vagina. So now that's where I'm at now. I'm at the stage where I dilate twice a week, basically, for the rest of my life. So, and that's it.
So obviously it's such a lengthy process to get to where you are now. How was that mentally for you?
Mentally, I think for me, it's elation. It's elation because I finally got where I wanted to be, you know, and where I wanted to be was a place where I thought I'd never get. You know, like I've already said, because of my background, my upbringing, I never thought that would be me. So, you know, it was elation. But obviously, the only thing what knocks the shine off it a little bit is the pain. What I was in for 6 weeks. Now, the pain varies for different people because everyone heals differently. You know, I'm quite a slow healer, so I had quite a bit of swelling, and when the painkillers wore off, for the first 6 weeks, I was in quite a bit of pain, and I was having to keep myself stocked up on ibuprofen and paracetamol, which is all we're allowed to take. Yeah, it's the first 6 weeks, it's just very painful. So you're meant to be off work, really, if you can be, the whole 3 months, the whole 12 weeks. But it just wasn't doable for me. You know, my company wouldn't give me that length of time off paid. So I had 3 weeks off and then I went back to work. But luckily for me, my job is a sit-down job. I just work in a security gatehouse, so I'm sat down. There's a TV in the cabin. So luckily for me, I could still take it easy because basically you're told not to do anything strenuous, which is why you're meant to be signed off work for 3 months. But my job, it weren't strenuous, and it's not a strenuous job. I'm sat down, so I was okay. I was able to recover.
So do you think you'd feel the same about your gender identity if you didn't have the surgery?
For me, no. I'd identify the same, you know, as the woman that I am, but I wouldn't feel as womanly if I didn't have the surgery. So that's the distinction there.
So, as we've touched on previously, you took part in a Channel 4 documentary series, episode 1, called The Making of Me, which aired just over a year ago now. How did it feel to share your story to thousands, potentially millions of people?
Yeah, it was I saw it as quite a positive experience, which is why I volunteered to do the documentary. Prior to doing that documentary, I was quite, what's the word? I don't know if I want to use the word prolific, but I was quite active, I should say, in the LGBT community, especially the trans community, trying to educate people that we're not monsters, that we trans people, we're not something that, or someone or people that you need to be afraid of. You know, we're just trying to live our truths, and we just want the same respect and decency given towards us as what everybody else is given. So when this opportunity come up to do this documentary, I just saw it as an extension of what I was already doing online through a charity, educating people, supporting people, because I recognised that going on a national TV channel, it's had the potential to reach a lot of people. Some of those people will be people like myself who was going through a transition, or people who may be just coming to terms with their gender identity, and also people outside of the LGBT, outside of the trans community especially. It was an opportunity for them to learn more about us, for more people, like you said, potentially millions of people, which I think it's got to be over 1 million now what's seen it. I think the initial figures was something like 760,000 by the second episode. In fact, no, I think that was on the first episode what I was on. That was when it was initially aired, and then it's still on the catch-up services now on all 4. It's been sold under license, I know, to America, Japan, British Airways, and they're just the ones that I know of. So it'll have been seen by millions of people now, and we all did it. The 9 of us took part in this documentary. His main reason was to educate people that we're nothing to be scared of. We are valid as people. We're not a fad. We're not a fashion. You know, you don't go through this for a fashion. You don't. Doing what we did, it can turn your life upside down. You know, people can want to disown you, and people lose jobs, and all sorts of discrimination happens. So you don't take this journey lightly, and that's what we wanted to show people, and that's what I feel the documentary did. It showed the real social side and lived experiences of trans people, and not just a surgery.
So you talked about working with a charity. Obviously you work with Say It. Why do you do the work that you do?
Well, as I've already touched on, I grew up in a negative environment for LGBT people. So, you know, I came out later on in life, you know, and there's no way that I would have felt like I was able to come out, or ever felt able to explore myself, explore my gender, my transgender identity when I was living under my parents' roof. I've used my negative experience growing up from what I've experienced from within my own family to help other people hopefully come to terms with their gender identity a lot more positively, and support the parents and give the information, be a source of information for the parents of trans children, the husbands, the wives of trans adults, you know, the employers of trans people. That's why I did the charity work, because it's one thing. Well, I still do the charity work, but it's one thing reaching out to people online, which is it's a great thing. It does help, because like I say, I remember when there was no internet and I felt like a freak, because I felt like I was the only person like me, because I didn't know anyone else like me. But there's nothing like having a physical person in front of you who's part of the trans community, part of the gay community, or the bi community, or the intersex community, and saying, look, I'm a normal human being, you know, do I deserve the same respect as everybody else, you know, and when they can see you in person, it's a more human experience. And I think it's easier to get to an extent to help people understand what we're about. So, you know, I just don't want anybody to go through, if possible, what I went through, the torment, the trauma. I want society to understand. So I do the charity work, because in my role in the charity, you know, I go to assemblies in schools, and I'll do talks and educate people outside of the LGBT. I'll sometimes get brought in to the young people's groups at the charity as a mentor to help give them support. And then I go to the parents' evening, where there'll be maybe parents who their child has just come out, or they may have been out some time and they want an idea of what life's going to be like for them as a young adult when they're grown up. And I'm there to say, look, you know, it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing, and to show them, you know, that if I can do it and live a happy life coming from my background, then the potential is there for their child too.
And that's amazing. So what's been the biggest achievement in your life so far, do you think?
Wow, that's a big question. The biggest achievement so far in my life? Wow. Well, first of all, it's got to be having my kids. You know, they're the most important thing. Like, you know, their happiness and their health and safety. Other than that, I think just being able to be me. I think that apart from bringing another life into this world, or other lives, plural, into this world, you know, there's nothing bigger than in this modern world that we live in, where a lot of people are still too scared to live authentically, you know, and be themselves. I feel like coming from my background, my family background, my biggest achievement outside of producing and raising two beautiful children is being able to be me and be proud of who I am, and I'm on cloud nine. You know, I've got a great place to live. I've got two beautiful, healthy kids. I've had my surgery now. I've got everything I wanted in my life. So the only other thing is maybe a new job in the future, which I'm working on. A new career. But other than that, I can't complain. I think that's as good as it gets, really.
So would you say that there's judgment in the LGBT community?
Is there judgment in the LGBT community? Do you mean between the different sections of the LGBT? Yes, definitely. Yes. I'd say I've not personally experienced judgment. I don't think, because I surround myself by the right people now. But I've definitely heard, especially with the work that I do in the trans community, there's some people in the gay community who can be against people in the trans community, i.e. they just think it's a load of rubbish. They don't believe in it. Or I think I've heard said before that we in the trans community are making it harder for the gay community because they had it relatively okay, and then some in the gay community now feel like because we trans have come out that the people in the gay community, they're getting it more again, having come so far after fighting their battles over the decades. But generally, most of the people, I know most of the people, different categories, a few different categories, shall we say. I know a few different categories of the LGBT personally, lesbian, gay, bisexual, as well as other transgender people. And the majority of them, they're very supportive, and, there's always going to be someone from any walk of life who doesn't agree with trans people. But the work I do is I do it to try and educate people, so that hopefully one day in an ideal world, there's less people, if not no people, who are prejudiced against transgender people or anyone who's just going about their life, not causing anybody any harm.
So this might come as quite a big question, but obviously you've touched on prejudice. Have you ever been a victim of, hate crime, or ever felt unsafe just being yourself?
I've never been a victim of hate crime, no, touch wood, luckily. Prejudiced, yeah. I've been, I've had abuse in the street. People try and laugh at me as they're walking past me. People looking into my crotch, both, men and women, looking at my crotch if they're not sure to see what genitalia is there. Like, where do I start? Yeah, my safety is like before I started to fully transition, i.e. being full-time in inverted commas, I don't know how else to explain it, but being full-time in inverted commas, living as my true self full all the time, rather than, sometimes and not others. At one time I used to walk home from work, and I worked till early hours of the morning. After I came out and decided to live my truth full time, I no longer felt safe walking home the early hours of the morning, so I get taxis all the time from work. Other situations, I used to always be a bit apprehensive, how am I going to be received if going into the ladies' toilets, but when you get years down the line, you get a bit more confident. I work out in a gym, so before my surgery, I didn't feel like I could go into the ladies to get changed. So I went to the gym already dressed, or used the disabled toilet, just because I was ashamed of having the wrong genitalia, and I didn't like seeing it, so I didn't want anybody else to see it. And I didn't want to make other people feel awkward around me, so I just stayed away from the ladies' changing room. And just generally, the main thing is when you're out and you're visibly out, you're a visible trans person, because you get some what are classed as stealth or being able to pass in inverted commas again, and they might not ever get any abuse because people don't know. And we use the term passing. It's not being transgender. It's not necessarily about. We don't all want to what we call pass, where people can't tell whether you're trans or not. That's not an aim for all of us in the trans community, but for some in the trans community, especially in the early days, because it just means it's less scary. You know, you don't have to worry as much about getting abuse on the street, which most of us who are visible, such as myself, we can get. So when you don't pass, you can just get all kinds of abuse, people sniggling, laughing, you know, they might say something rude. The world's your oyster, use your imagination, what we could get called. But, you know, I'm proud of being a trans person now. Not all trans people are. Some trans people, they want to discard the trans part of their identity. But for me, it's my journey to becoming who I am, how I became who I am. And I think rather than be ashamed of my journey, to live in my truth, celebrate it. So, and that's what I do. Like, I like to look my best, and I always, you know, I take pride in my appearance, but it's not an aim to be able to walk down the street all stealth anymore and nobody not know. If people know that I'm trans, great, you know, as long as I'm respected like every other human being, any other decent human being, then that's all that matters.
So in terms of respect for our listeners, can you walk us through any questions that might be inappropriate or disrespectful to pose to a trans person?
Oh, again, how long's a piece of string? What you got to remember with this question is that we in the trans community, we're all individuals just like any other human being. So, you know, something that one person might be okay with, another person might not be okay with in the trans community. For example, as a rule, if you get to know somebody for the first time, don't ask about the genitalia or if they plan to have surgery, because it's a bit like, you know, me walking up to a man and saying, how big's your particulars downstairs, or walking up to another woman and saying, have you got a vajazzle done, when I've met her for the first time. You know, it's funny, but it sounds funny, but it's that common sense, you know. As a rule, what I always say is, if you wouldn't ask a non-trans woman the question, don't ask it a trans woman. If you wouldn't ask a non-trans man something, don't ask a trans man that thing. And I think that's the best guide.
So what organisations or resources would be helpful to others, do you think?
If someone was coming out now and asked my advice, I think the best resource is an ally. That's the best resource. Having someone in the trans community as your ally, and also having someone outside of the trans community as an ally, they're both very valuable in my book. You know, if you're just coming out, be able to speak to someone who gets you, who gets your situation, who's been there and done that, I think that's probably the most invaluable resource. You can look stuff up on the internet, you can read books, but nothing quite matches that first-hand human experience. Having an ally who's both trans and an ally who's not trans, they can both be valuable in different ways. Like I say, an ally who is of the same community as yourself, the information, the support, it's obvious there how valuable that is. But also allies outside of the trans community, there can be a great support, because one thing I feel with my allies who are allies outside of the LGBT is that they can make you realise that, you know what, the world isn't such a bad place. If you support me, then, maybe there's other people outside there, outside the community who'll support me. If you, the non-LGBT person who's an ally, gets me and understands me, then that gives me hope that there'll be others out there who are outside the LGBT, especially the trans community in this case, who will, if at first maybe don't quite understand it, can still be supportive and are willing to learn and get educated. It just gives you hope. It just makes you realise that maybe the world isn't quite such a scary place. Maybe it's not only other trans people who get trans people. So for me, that is the best. They both are the best resources.
And lastly, for this podcast, do you have any words of advice for your younger self now that you've come to this place?
Wow, that's a big question. Do I have any words for my younger self? Yeah, I think just keep going, keep being the tenacious, steadfast person that you are, and follow your heart. That's got to be follow your heart and follow your truth, because if you don't follow your truth, you're never going to be happy. You have to be true to yourself, otherwise what's the point?
Thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your unique perspectives and experiences, Vicky, and thank you all for tuning in. We have been Womanhood the Podcast, and I have been your host. Find us on Twitter for more at WomanhoodCast, and me, your host, at C. Stan Majerno. Goodbye for now.